Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel for the next part of my series on Avalon Hill's Jutland. And in this one, I'm just going to talk to you rather briefly about how the strategic search map works for both sides. Now, although this is very much a tactical game, its heart really is in the strategic planning that both sides have to go in for. And so this piece of equipment, i.e. the map, is critical to that. Now, before I go into the details, a quick word about how the game is won. So the victory conditions vary between the basic and the advanced game, but at their core, it boils down to whoever sinks more of the other side's ships while preserving more of their own fleet. In the advanced game, the British also have the possibility of scoring a win if they force the German fleet back into port 26 hours after the first sighting or less. So there is an element of making the German player stand and fight, really. And the reason that this has been done is because the assumption strategically in this game is, as was historically correct, the British are effectively blockading the North Sea. And so the onus of attack is very much upon the German player. So both sides have one of these search maps. The German fleet is based in Wilhelmshaven, which is effectively that hex. The British Grand Fleet and the battlecruiser force are divided. The main part of the Grand Fleet starts up in Scapa Flow. That's their starting hex there. Warrender's battleship force is at Cromarty over there, and the battlecruisers are in Rosyth over there. So the British do begin the game divided, and so the onus is on the German player to try and engineer a situation whereby he can hopefully catch an isolated part of the Grand Fleet somewhere, destroy it, and then make off, hopefully. And to begin with, the German player plots out his initial move. The British player always begins the basic game in port. So the German player will plot his moves out up until the point where he decides he wants to begin searching, or if he ends up in this shaded area or this shaded area. These represent the coastal patrols along the British Isles and Norway. The moment the German fleet enters either of those, they are spotted and the British can start making their move. Alternatively, the Germans may decide they want to start searching somewhere out here at sea. When they get to that point, having traced their route out from Wilhelmshaven, they will announce the fact. Because it takes the British fleet a few hours to raise steam, now each hex of movement counts as an hour's sailing at cruising speed, or call it about 15 knots at most. Because the British take a certain number of hours to raise steam and begin moving, the German player may, at his option, move his fleet another 4 hexes, or fleets if he's dividing his forces, to represent the additional time. Now, this is optional. They do not have to do it if they don't want to. So essentially, that is the movement option in a nutshell. How does searching work in the base game? The German player and the British player, Germans always initiate searching first, must call out the hex that each of their task forces occupies. Now, let's say, for example, the German has kept his fleet together, but he wishes to begin searching when it reaches hex S15 over there. So he'll just say S15. If he wishes to, he can also call out all the adjacent hexes. And if the British player has units in any of those, he has to acknowledge contact. If they've made contact, then a battle begins. If the German player does not successfully find anything, then it passes to the British player, wherever his task forces may be that turn, to call out. They must call out the hex they're in, and optionally, the surrounding hexes if they wish to. Now, in the advanced game, this dynamic is changed somewhat because it introduces light cruisers, which broaden your scouting options out a little. So, to reflect the German lack of light cruisers, relatively speaking, in the advanced rules, the Germans are not permitted to call out the surrounding hexes. However, they're no longer required to call out the hex that they're in. So for tactical reasons, you may want to keep the position of your fleet quiet on some turns. The British are in the same boat in the advanced game. You do not have to call out the hex that you're in. Let's say a British force is there. You don't have to call it out in the advanced game. For each cruiser counter, light cruisers that is, that accompanies a British battleship force, they can call out a surrounding hex. Again, it's at their option. So yes, I realize I've been doing a lot of talking and just waving a pencil over a blank map. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to here's one I prepared earlier moment. Now this represents one of the German plans I've actually drawn up for the solitaire option. Yes, this game does have a solitaire option. Now, normally in a two-player game, you would not plot out your entire move, your entire plan, as it were, nor would you execute it in ink. But I've done that just so that it stands out more clearly. So this is a completely hypothetical German sweep. And the reason I've given you the full plan is because I just want to talk about the thinking behind it. So, assuming the German fleet sails at midnight, or just as the 30th of May is commencing, and the High Seas Fleet with its battle cruisers is travelling in a single formation until it reaches that position at 2 p.m. on the 30th of May. At that point, the battle cruisers are going to split off and do a little diversionary raid of their own, while the main fleet continues northwards. Eventually, the two, as you can see by this note, will rendezvous just north of the Long Forties. Now, if I were the German player playing against a human British player, what I would do would be to wait until I was, let's say, just either on or just short of the separation point before announcing that I was ready to begin searching. I would then have the option of marking a bit of time there, or waiting a few turns until the battlecruiser force and my main force had well and truly separated before commencing calling out my search hexes. Now, the effect this would have on the British player would be to tell them that I've got two separated forces which are conducting searches, but they won't know the composition of those two forces. And you'll notice that I'm very carefully keeping the battle cruisers just outside the British patrol line. Not going to give them any freebies there. Hopefully, the British will respond to one or both of these forces, and I will get my chance to cut off, hopefully, the battle cruisers, because they're the easiest nut to crack. If no contact is made, then I would probably just mark time for a bit to ensure that I've stayed at sea for the requisite amount of time before sweeping back down the North Sea, before returning to Wilhelmshaven in the very early hours of the 1st of June. Now, of course, as I say, we would not plot this out in its entirety, because once you begin searching, the fleets move one space every turn at the player's discretion, and then you call out your search hexes. The end result of all this is that if you're determined to have a fight or, force an action with someone, you will gradually close on your opponent, because unless you're playing the advanced rules and he's keeping mum with his searches, you have a pretty good idea of where the other fellow is by the hexes he's calling out. So you will find each other eventually. The advanced rules, where you're not required to call these positions out, gives the British a bit of help, because the last thing the British want to do strategically is when they're trying to get their fleets to rendezvous is to start calling out searches before they're united, because that will give the German player a clue. And conversely, having my battle cruisers in this scenario trail their coats off the British coast is potentially asking for trouble, but that is me trying to offer them bait that they simply can't ignore. So there we go. That is an example of a German plan and how it would work. I mentioned that there's a solitaire option in this game. It's quite a laborious one, but it's well worth it if you've got the time. And it simply is to create 6 German plans and 6 British plans. So whichever side you choose to play, you can create your own plan normally. You can commit to it, but then you roll a dice for the other side to see which of their plans they commit to. And then what you do is you compare them. So that was my hypothetical German plan, what I made earlier. And here is my rather different hypothetical British plan. So you see the problem the British have, because the Germans can steal a bit of a march on them by keeping mum until they're well into the North Sea. Whereas the British, when they do sortie, have to scramble in order to try and get their forces linked up. Now, it's fairly easy to get the battleship forces linked up. In fact, if you wanted to be really cautious, you could link them up within the area of your patrol lines. But getting the battle cruisers up to you is always a bit tricky. Of course, historically at Jutland, both arms of the Grand Fleet were actually, they joined up fairly early, but the battle cruisers were off to the south, and they were well out in the upper North Sea when they got to the planned rendezvous, which of course was interrupted by the German fleet. So this may be a bit of a suboptimal sweep for the British, but it's one of the plans I drew up. Now, if you play the tournament rules, which are the really, really advanced rules on top of the advanced rules, the British get the option of conducting a sweep, which means that they get the same options the Germans do in terms of an early initial deployment and the chance to be well out at sea by the time the Germans are. See, this is the only thing I query about the strategic side of this game, because as we all know, historically, thanks to the work of Room 40, the British were actually so aware that something was up and that the Germans were coming out, that the Grand Fleet actually set sail before the German High Seas Fleet did. But if you play the basic Jutland game, there is no option for that. The Germans get their initial move and then the British have to respond late. If you use the British sweep option, which the designer very, very kindly included, you have the option of basically doing what Jellicoe was attempting to do. So in this case, I've had the British do a very, very cautious set of rendezvous. And unlike Jellicoe and Beatty historically, I'm not separating the battle cruisers out. I'm going to keep the force together. And then we do a fairly wide sweep down past Dogger Bank, passing unrealistically close to the coast of Holland, but hey, and then hugging the British coast on the way back, just in case those Germans are thinking of pulling another bombardment of these poor coastal towns. They'll find the entire fleet sort of trundling north. So that was my thinking with that. Now, of course, if they don't meet in your hypothetical scenario, there is an option for simply moving them when they reach a sort of stopping point or a close point, as close as you can to the other, and then just steadily closing until you force an engagement. So that's one option. So that, oh, hello, Oscar. Yeah, the cat has come to add to the briefing, everybody. So that is the bare bones basics of using the strategic map and of searching. Now, if you really want to take searching to the nth degree, use the tournament rules because they build on the light cruiser search rules and the nation specific search rules that you get in the advanced game, and they introduce high speed searching for battle cruisers and light cruisers with a speed of 11 or greater. That does give the British a bit of an advantage. Fast ships like that can search 2 hexes every turn rather than the standard one. The Germans, for their part, obtain the services of their Zeppelins, which, while limited in terms of how they can move and what they can see, provide the Germans with an extra, it's 9 or 10 sets of eyes up in the sky. So that really helps them materially if you choose to use those rules. The Zeppelins really do add a new dimension to it, and I recommend their use. So there we go. As I say, that is the search strategic map and search system in a nutshell. Now, I realize this short description doesn't even begin to cover all of the fun and complex things you can do, but that is one of the beauties of this game, I think, that you've been given a very simple template. There are some even more detailed hex search rules in the tournament game, but those, to my experience, get a bit on the clunky side, especially the optional rule that the German player can call out search hexes in random order. That really becomes a bit of a head scratcher. I think the rules as given in the advanced game, plus maybe the high speed search rules from the tournament rules, are the sweet spot, really. And if you play your cards right and play your fleets right, you get that happy moment, or not, when you can grab your battle area marker and then proceed to set up your battle area. And speaking of which, in the next video, I'll be returning to talk about the tactical side of this game and how the combat works at its various levels. But I think that's brought me to a good point to stop in terms of talking about the strategic map. So it only remains for me to thank you all so much for following this series. I hope you're finding it interesting and you're enjoying this revisit of a wonderful classic Avalon Hill title. I'm really looking forward to the next video because the tactical system in this game is so much fun. Thank you all very much for watching and for your company. And as always, please feel free to leave comments. I will try to respond as soon as I can. And I look forward to seeing you all in the next video. Thanks very much and do take care. Bye.